I like to think of what they call licks as, in Zen, they say, when you point your finger at the moon, never mistake your finger for the moon. So licks and vocabulary in general are a means to an end. They're a means to end up playing your own stuff. But you got to start by understanding how the vocabulary is put together. So a very valuable thing that Lee Konitz once told me when I was a kid and was first starting to sit in with Lee a lot. I was about 17, 18. And I said, man, where do you get that stuff from? You know, I mean, how do you conceive of that? And he said something very telling. He said to me, music to him, to me, he said, has always been a note-to-note kind of thing. If I can understand and justify every note that I'm playing by, when I'm practicing, playing it slowly and analyzing what the meaning of each note is, then I'm more likely to play something when I'm improvising that has meaning. So I've taken a phrase like this, which was a phrase that, a typical Charlie Parker phrase, actually, and I want to look at it in a note-to-note fashion. I want to, let's see what each note of this means. So here we are on a 2-5-1 in the key of B flat. And the phrase is this. It starts a pickup on the end of 4. I can put that little neighbor in there. That's nice, add a little chromatic to it. So one way, let's say I have 2 variations of this. I have and I'll add a little neighbor at the beginning. That actually starts to be more like a Don Bias phrase. I mean, I think Bird used it, but, you know, it probably all came from Art Tatum anyway. But anyway, as Sonny Rollins told me once, saxophone players are translators of pianists. That's a different tutorial. But in this case, you say, well, where does it start? Our tonic, where does it end? So that's a good idea, just figure out where it starts and where it ends, and then figure out what goes on in the middle. I guess like if you're writing a story, that might be, I don't know how writers think, but I think maybe they think like that. Well, I've got a beginning, then I've got an ending. So what's the end of the story? What's the middle of the story? So in this case, I'm ending on the 5th. The first note is the 5th. And what happens in between? So it's the 5th of the key. So so I realize what intervals are going on. It's fourths. There's 3 fourths or 2 fourths from the 5th of the key. Oh, so that means I'm playing a 4th into my 2 chord, and I'm hitting the actually the 11th, the 7th, and the 3rd of the 2 chord. That particular 4th in every key, if I start on the 5th of the key, gives me the sus4 of the 5 chord, because I have that C in it. And the sus4 is very close to the 2 minor chord. So that really gives me a 2 minor with the 7th and the 3rd. So I've got that taken care of. And then I'm hitting my G7 by 5 chord, and I go down to the 5th, to the 9th of the key, which is the root of the 2 chord. So it's from my 3rd to my root. Now, even if I've gone that far, I know the ultimate result of the phrase I want. But my ear tells me, gee, that's a pretty interval. Boo-boo-bee-da. ba ba be da. Ooh, how does that feel to play that in some different keys? And I'm thinking 5, 1, 4, 2 in the key. So I've turned it into a little song. Just those first 3 notes have become an exercise within themselves. See, these exercises that I'm giving you, they're like those little Russian dolls where you get a layer and each doll is smaller. There's a layer and then there's another little doll inside and there's another. And musical phrases are like that. There are little nuggets inside each other, like a beautiful, chocolate bar. Those boxes of candies where it's got a couple of different layers and each one is caramel, and then there's nougat, and then there's chocolate, that kind of stuff. That's what music's like. So now we have those first 4 notes taken care of. Now what else goes on? Oh. I see. So that could be a resolution even. That could take me, So that by itself could be the end of a phrase. But where is it taking me? Boo, boo, bee, boo, boo, dee. So then I have a neighbor note, a chromatic, an approach note, a guide, whatever, not a guide tone, an approach note, or a chromatic. I think Barry Harris just says chromatics, and others, we call them lower chromatic neighbor. The actual relationship, because it's all about relationships, just like life, is the C sharp concert is the lower chromatic neighbor to the D, which is the third of the key. So excuse this read, but I'm just showing you these ideas. So then we have the fourths, which bring us to the third of the 2 chord, the 7th to the 3rd, drop down to the root and play a chromatic. Now our resolution is on our G7th, on our F7th concert. It's the diatonic notes of the key. You could say that it's the 13th to the sus4, to the 9th, to the flat 9, in resolving into the 5th of the 1 chord. That's an awful lot of thought. So I think, I say to myself, well, how would somebody who doesn't know harmony and wouldn't be, okay, I can define it like that. I know the reason for every note. But something told me when I'd listened to Lee play that I didn't think he was quite thinking like that. I thought if it came down to it, he could say, yes, it starts at the 5th of the key, it hits the 3rd, the 7th, and then the 3rd of the 2 chord, goes down to the 1, does a neighbor note, into the 13th of the 5 chord, then hits the sus4 of the 5 chord, to the 9 of the 5 chord, to the flat 9 of the 5 chord, which can also be interpreted as a neighbor note, upper chromatic neighbor note, of the 5th of the resolution, which is the 5th of the key. That's an awful lot of thought to get to that. And, having observed people like Ira Sullivan, Chet Baker, and Zoot Sims, and even Stan Getz, who didn't have a grasp, the kind of grasp of harmony that some other people might have had.